Hello all, good evening. I am Ricardo Sullivan, the administrator, the Institute of Surveyors. Today's session is on property management and practice for varying classes of building, as we can see up on our screen. David Bally would be presenting this evening for us. Our chair for this meeting would be Abraham Derry. And before we begin, there's a couple of things. There is a couple, of course, house rules so that we can have a smooth session. If you may have realized already, your mics would be muted. So we did mute all the mics. If you do have a question, it's not that we don't want questions. If you do have a question, there's the option for you to raise your hand. You can raise your hand, or you can raise the question in the chat, and we will ask a question for you if you place it in the chat, or we would allow you some time to ask the question. But just for a smooth session, we muted the mics in this case. Mr. Abraham, there is our host. I'd like to put him on now so that he could guide you along through the session. Just a moment. Okay, just having a little challenges here as it pertains to his microphone. He's sorting that out shortly. So just bear with us a couple moments again.
All right, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. All right, so welcome everyone to this CPD event. This is the first one that will be hosted by the valuers, but it's all divisions could appreciate from what we have today. So without further ado, let me introduce to you all the person who will be presenting today on Ipms. And it's none other than our very own Vice President, Mr. David Bally. David has been a valuer for close to 18 years, gaining substantial experience in the valuation of residential, commercial, agricultural, and industrial properties. He became a professional member of the RICS in 2010 and is the current Vice President of the ISTT. David currently leads the Commercial Valuations Department of G.A. Farrell and Associates Limited as its Chief Valuation Officer. He is an advocate for upholding and maintaining valuation standards and best practice and works ever so assiduously to this end. Guys, I now hand you over to Mr. David Bally.
Thank you, Abraham. A minute there, I was wondering if you were speaking about me. Thanks for that very illustrious introduction. So can I share my screen now? Good evening, everyone, and I trust that this new year is progressing well for everybody. Thanks for joining me on this short journey through measurement practice.
You should.
Right. Everyone seen my screen?
Oh, yeah, we are. Yes, we are.
All right, great. Today's presentation will focus primarily on RICS Property Measurement Second Edition, which speaks to the measurement of office type and residential type classes of building. I've also taken the opportunity to provide an introductory exposure to the Ipms for industrial and retail buildings. So first of all, the red book by which lays out the standards to which we value property or undertake valuations, RICS Valuation Global Standards, or the red book. What does that say? It says when members are undertaking valuation work relating to real estate assets or liabilities, they must have regard to the international property measurement standards wherever applicable. So it's important that we be up to date on all the standards and we adhere to them in all our valuation work. Right. So there's a brief rundown. This presentation is divided into 4 parts. The first 2 parts would focus on the RICS adopted standards, which are really mandatory and have an effective date of May 2018. Ricardo, do you have that poll question?
Yes, it's here. The valuation standards question.
Yeah, you wanna
Launch it
that now, or yeah?
No problem. I'm launching the poll now. Right, I'll leave it for 20 seconds again. All right, and then the poll. And these are the results, David.
Yeah. Okay, so I see most of us are already using the RICS property measurement, which makes my job a lot easier. Thank you. All right, just moving on. So what does the standard say? The following information is to be retained in the file or in the report. That would be the purpose of the measurement instruction, date of the measurement instruction, date of measurement, the measurement standard adopted, and if Ipms is not used, the reason for not using it. You also have to include the measurement methodology adopted. That would be if you use laser meter, tape measure, or whatever type instrument, the scale of any plans used, the floor area, schedule relevant areas, cross-reference to floor plans, unit of measurement, and conversion factor, if applicable, and the name of the RICS member or RICS firm responsible for the instruction. I've highlighted conversion factor because it's the subject of the following slide. So since surveying is the science of measurement, then I think we should be as accurate and consistent as possible. So I've done this simple, really straightforward calculator using Excel, which I am proposing to send to all values so that we can agree on the conversion standards. It doesn't necessarily have to be in this format. I just want to have agreement with respect to conversion standards across the fraternity. Yeah. Right. So the standards embody office buildings, residential buildings. Office buildings are divided into Ipms 1, Ipms 2, Ipms 3 office. Residential buildings in Ipms 1, Ipms 2, Ipms 3A to 3C. And to the right of the screen, we have its comparison with the Code of Measuring Practice 6th edition, which we are familiar with in previous years. Gross external area, gross internal area, net internal area, effective floor area. So the ones selected in red are the relevant standards pertinent to our measurement of residential and office classes of building. And these are also very similar to what we would have been accustomed to under Code of Measuring Practice, which would be the gross external area and net internal area. Let's start off part 1, IPMS office buildings. So which basis of measurement would apply for valuation? Common practice before IPMS is to include the gross external area in reporting. IPMS 1 is really the standard that you use to measure whole buildings. And it is defined as the sum of the area of each floor level of a building measured to the outer perimeter of external construction features and reported on a floor-by-floor basis. And the other highlighted standard, which would be IPMS 3 office. So according to the practice statement, IPMS 3 office is defined as the floor area available on an exclusive basis to an occupier, measured and stated separately, but excluding standard facilities and shared circulation areas. Right. So the left image shows the relevant area as determined by measurements using gross external area. And to the right would be IPMS 1, previously described. This would be the upper floor level. So you could see from the diagrams that they are very similar in terms of how the area is calculated. So C being a void level on the upper floor, which is excluded. Everything else is included. Just how you report it, because you have areas of the building labeled A and B, A being a covered gallery and B being a balcony, that you include, but you state separately. You state the area separately. Before we move on, I just want to introduce what might be a new concept to some, and that is the area within window reveals. So in measuring the building correctly, one must determine the internal dominant face, which is defined the inside finished surface comprising more than 50% of the floor to ceiling height for each IDF wall section. So if you're looking at the building from the inside, this is the wall from the inside. You'll see my pointer, right? You have to measure this would be the window. Yeah. This would be the window reveal. So this area is actually measured. And instances where you determine that is to be measured, the floor to ceiling height, the glazing itself has to be greater than 50% of that wall area, of that wall height. So you could see that this one is ignored because it's less than 50%. It's not 50% wide, it's 50% in height. And that is represented here under internal elevation. So that's the internal dominant face. All right. Everybody fine with that? So there's another example of comparing Code of Measuring Practice with IPMS 3 office. As you can see on the left, what we would have been accustomed to would be excluding the external walls. This is under net internal area, excluding the external walls, standard facilities like the washrooms, as well as the as well as the internal structural walls. So those areas in white would be excluded. The areas in gray are standard or common facilities that would normally have been taken out anyway. When you look at the Ipms 3 office, it's similar, but you're also including rather than excluding, as compared to net internal area, the area occupied by the internal structural walls. And if you notice, they made a point to identify this room as a limited use area because there's no natural light, no windows in this area. So effectively, this room could probably command a reduced rental rate, if you want to analyze it like that. Right. Here we have another example of measurements on the Ipms 3 office, the upper floor, single occupancy. And as you could see here, what we just spoke about is coming into practice. Glazing extends to greater than 50% of the vertical section. So this would be measured to the internal dominant face, this area. And it also identifies another example of a limited use area. And as you could see, the standard facilities are excluded. These are in white. One of the main differences now between NIA and Ipms 3 is that you can see the columns are excluded, but in Ipms 3, the columns are included. And that could also effectively be a limited use area that could be reported separately. The area, that is the area occupied by the columns, both island columns and engaged columns. All right. This one is different. It considers multiple occupancy, both NIA and Ipms 3. The main difference being that under Ipms 3 office, you're measuring to the center line of the shared wall between occupants. And also the fact that the columns are included. Columns are included. Same thing, standard facilities, voids, all of that is excluded from the area. It's the end of part 1. Part 2, Ipms on residential buildings. So which basis of measurement would apply for valuation? Common practice before Ipms was used the gross external area in measurement of residential buildings. According to the practice statement, Ipms 3A to 3C residential can each be used as a basis of measurement, specifically for valuation. Ipms 3A, however, is chosen since it's very similar to how valuers are accustomed to measuring residential buildings. And it is defined as the floor area available on an exclusive basis to an occupier. Let's get on into some examples. So Ipms 3A is the area in exclusive occupation measured as follows. So for a detached dwelling, example, a freestanding single family house, you would measure to the outer face of the external wall. So you can see how that is very similar to gross external area. For an attached dwelling, example, a townhouse, you measure to the outer face of the external wall and to the center line of shared walls between occupants. That is not just going out on a limb here, but that is how I would have measured the buildings prior to Ipms, a townhouse specifically. So it's very similar to that. Multi-unit dwellings, example, a condominium, measured to the outer face of the external wall and to the center line of shared walls between occupants and to the finished surface of walls shared with common facilities. So here a comparison in the actual property measurement standards between Ipms 1 and gross external area. Just summarized here, measurements to be included but stated separately and individually. So attics, basement cellars, balconies and verandas or porches, garages, and we would have seen before a couple of examples of limited use areas. Measurements to be excluded but which may be stated separately and individually. Patios, staircase openings would be excluded, any floor above ground floor level. Covered void areas, example atria, this is only included at ground floor level. And vertical penetrations that form part of common facilities. So here we have the one unit of a duplex. Just to illustrate what we just spoke of in terms of measurement. So you could see here the center line of shed walls between dwellings. That's what you're measuring to. And to the outer measurements of the outer external walls. Veranda is included, but it's, you can state it separately, the area. Patios are excluded, but stated separately. That's fairly straightforward. The only difference here that you might identify is that the area of the staircase opening on the upper floor is excluded. And the balcony included, but stated separately. I remember it's measured to the outer perimeter of external construction features. Right. So measuring a condominium, this is more or less what it would look like. You're measuring to the center line of shed walls between the apartments. Honestly, I don't know how we might determine the area or even the existence of this vertical penetration, but that is illustrated here. Maybe if you have ideas, you could probably let me know. Right, so you see that common facilities are excluded. Staircase, lift service, plant room, etc. Right, oh, Regina, part 2 already, okay. Right, so like I said earlier, part 3 and 4 are really introductory type slides for the other 2 classes of building, that'd be industrial and retail.
Hi, David. Before you continue, I just have a short poll on the internal dominant phase
Okay.
to launch.
Sure.
All right. Right, so a poll is now launched. You can read the questions. Are you aware of the concept internal dominant phase for commercial buildings? Do you practice using internal dominant phase in measurement reporting? All right. We do not know who answer yes or no, so be at pleasure to be honest, because at the end of the day, all of us in Trinidad and Tobago, we are aiming to be using the same standards and to be reporting on one standard. So when someone reads our reports, it should be very similar in what we're reporting. So let's just get a view of what is actually going on. Right. I'll leave it for 50 more seconds. Okay, I'm ending the poll. And you can see your results. I'm going to share it now. So we have something to talk about in a future meeting. You see that, David?
Yeah.
Right. So some of us are not aware of the internal dominant phase. So it may be a relatively new concept to some of us.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. You can continue into part 3.
Yeah.
Keep this here.
Okay. I mean, it's a bit tedious, but it's part of the standards.
Yeah.
We had to do the work. We are measurement scientists after all.
Also, we need to be mindful, not all the participants here are valuation surveyors.
Yes, thanks for that, Ricardo.
Yeah.
Right. So an introduction to IPMS industrial buildings. So this IPMS standard would have come out in January 2018. So far, I've not seen any adoption as yet by the RICS. But I mean, the document exists, and I don't suspect that RICS will not adopt it sometime in the future. So which basis of measurement would apply for valuation? So generally speaking, gross external area and gross internal area would be the two standards on the Code of Measuring Practice that I would have used to in evaluation of industrial buildings. The IPMS document actually identifies 4 different categories. These would be IPMS 1, IPMS 2 industrial, IPMS 3A, and IPMS 3B. 3 and 3B are used for exclusive occupation. Like I said before, IPMS 1 is measurement of whole buildings. So even if you have, even if the building is subdivided into different units which are separate, which are independently occupied, if you're measuring the building as a whole, you refer to IPMS 1. Right, but that's the definition of IPMS 1. You can see the measurements illustrated here in the red lines, and you can see that the covered area is also included in IPMS 1. So you measure up to the drip line. Yeah. Right, IPMS 1 ground floor. Sheltered areas included but stated separately. You're measuring to the outer perimeter of external construction features. Yeah. Right, IPMS 2. The total of the areas of each floor level of a building measured to the internal dominant face of all external walls and balconies on each level. So this is similar to gross internal area. And as you would imagine, the office space within industrial buildings are also to be measured in accordance with IPMS 2. So you can see the external walls are excluded. As well as the covered area. Right, this is just illustrating that further. And again, the IDF comes to light here, but in this case, it's a roller shutter door, which is consistent with some industrial buildings. So you're measuring to the shutter line as they describe it here. Yeah. And this is the upper floor, IPMS 2. So you could see one of the main differences is that they're asking that we include the area occupied by the staircase. I'm not sure, but I never used, under code of measuring practice, we would have ignored that space. That actually forms part of the upper floor or mezzanine, as the case might be. Right, the standards for exclusive occupation, IPMS 3A and IPMS 3B. 3A, the floor area available on an exclusive basis to an occupier measured from the outside face of the external walls and any balconies, and also including sheltered areas. IPMS 3B, very similar, the floor area available on an exclusive basis to an occupier measured to the internal dominant face of external walls and balconies, and otherwise to the covered area. It's represented here on the ground floor, IPMS 3A. So measure to the center line between the shared units. The sheltered areas are included but seated separately. Measuring to the outer perimeter of external construction features. Right, IPMS 3 industrial, the upper floor. So as you could see here, we're not including the area occupied by the staircase, neither the standard facilities, the internal the staircase and lift. Oh, right, this is IPMS 3B, industrial ground floor. Right, windows less than 50% of floor to ceiling height measured to internal dominant face. And you're no longer measuring to the center line, you measure to the inside of the wall. This is the upper floor using IPMS 3B. Same points as highlighted on the ground floor. Right. So this, I don't think this is a new concept, probably as it's better defined here. So the clear height, the height measured from the floor to the lowest point of the structural element above, ignoring any brackets, struts, or fixtures and fittings. So this could be important to an occupier or prospective tenant in knowing what the height is, you know, to at least know for sure the stacking capabilities or the ability of the building to accommodate certain pallet height or so. So I think it's an important measurement to take. Also, it could also dictate whether or not the building could accommodate, let's say, a gantry crane or something like that. So that's clear height. Then we have internal height, which is more or less within the office space, you could say. The height measured from the floor to the lowest point of the ceiling, ignoring the existence of any brackets, struts, or fixtures and fittings. That's the end of part 3. I could go on, Ricardo, anything here? The last part to do part 4.
Yeah, you could go ahead.
Right, an introduction to IPMS, and this would cover retail buildings. Fun stuff. Right, these are the standards broken down: IPMS 1, IPMS 2, retail, IPMS 3A retail to 3C. Right, so this is IPMS 1, as you can see, is a measurement of the whole building, inclusive of everything, measured to the outer perimeter of external walls. This might be a fairly new concept as well, presumed boundary. So you're not actually measuring to where the wall is, but hypothetical boundary line you measure to. In the case of this unit. That's the ground floor. Right, first floor, or my mezzanine level for retail units. Once again, we are including the area occupied by the staircase at this level, in this level. Measured to the outer perimeter, external walls, the void areas are excluded. Fairly straightforward to retail shopping mall, ground floor level, measured to the outer perimeter of external walls. As you can see, they included the loading dock above here as well, which may or may not be covered. At the first floor level, similarly, leaving not including the void areas, you're including the space occupied by the staircase as well as the escalators and the lifts that intrude into the void area. You're actually measuring that and including that in IPMS 1. Right. So simpler retail building. And on the IPMS 1, this would be a sheltered or covered area that you're including under the standard. But you also state that particular area separately. IPMS 2 retail. The total of the areas of each floor level of a building measured to the internal dominant face of all external walls and external floor area on each level. We have some more details here. I won't get into it too much because I don't think this particular standard is relevant in terms of how we practice the valuation of retail buildings here. I could be wrong, but that could be up for debate. So similar to gross internal area. IPMS 3 retail, which these would apply to exclusive occupancy. The area next 3A, the area and exclusive occupation, including the floor area occupied by external walls, internal walls and pillars, including any external floor area, shelter area, and ancillary areas. IPMS 3B, the area and exclusive occupation, including the floor area occupied by internal walls and pillars, and may include external floor areas and ancillary areas. Let's see a drawing representation of that. Right. So windows less than 50% of floor to ceiling height measured to internal dominant face. That is the finished surface. We measure the center line of shed walls between units. And again, this concept of the presumed boundaries arises. Right, columns included. The upper level, you could see the staircases are not included in the size, in the area. Voids are excluded. and columns are included. Again, the shared walls between units are measured to the center line. Ipms 3B, retail ground level of mall, divided into exclusive use. It's a bit easy here, but in the following slide, so this is the top part of this slide. Let's see it much clearer here. Right, so the roller shutter door, which is here, measured to the internal dominant face. So you're measuring to the roller shutter door along its length. Windows greater than 50% of floor to ceiling height measured the internal dominant face. So this is an area in exclusive use. So you can see there they have exclusive use of the cargo lift, but not the exclusive use of this cargo lift. So these areas in white, more or less common or standard facilities, common facilities, I'd say. Right. What we're looking at here is actually the bottom part of this. So you know some of those mall units, the corner ones actually have a curved wall to the front of their unit. So you're actually squaring it off, measuring that, and then measuring the area using the original, the existing boundary wall, you could say. And you work on that area and state it separately. That is something I wanted to highlight there. So you have shared walls between units measured to the center line. Yeah. All right. Retail first floor level of mall divided into exclusive use. So similar to what I just said about on the ground floor, this is just the upper floor. You can see the staircases are within the units are not included. Measure to the shop line or presumed boundary. And once again, the internal dominant face. Windows greater than 50% of floor to ceiling height measured to the internal dominant face. Right. The same retail strip, retail building measured using Ipms 3B. Again, shared walls between units measured to the center line. Windows less than 50% of floor to ceiling height measured to internal dominant face. So you're not actually calculating the window reveal here because it's less than 50% of the floor to ceiling height. Yeah, all restrooms, washrooms, all of that is included. Right. Just something short on Ipms 3C, the areas, which is the area in exclusive occupation, excluding the floor area occupied by external walls, internal walls, and pillars. I'm also not getting too detailed into this because I don't think this is really what we would use or what we should use in our analysis of retail buildings. Right. So I'll just leave you with some of my proposals. The first one being uniform conversion standards for measurements, dimensions, and areas. This is pertinent to what I talked about earlier concerning the conversion factors. So I propose to send to the valuers to have some sort of agreement going forward. Down below, IPMS 3B industrial for the measurement and analysis of sections of an industrial building that are exclusively occupied. Another proposal, IPMS 3B retail for the measurement and analysis of retail buildings. IPMS 2 for the measurement and analysis of industrial buildings. Report, second to last proposal, report the clear height measurement in the valuation of industrial buildings wherever applicable. And lastly, Code of Measuring Practice 6th edition standards for the measurement and analysis of mixed use buildings. That's because there's no IPMS standard for mixed use as yet. Yep, and that'll bring me to the end of my short journey here. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, David. So before we have any questions, please, I'd like you all to remember the house rules. Raise your hands if you have a question. Also, try not to have too many questions on the industrial and retail, because that is a fairly new aspect which have not as yet been adopted by the RICS for use in evaluation. That being said, we will not outright deny any question on it. But before we go into that question segment, I have one more poll for residential valuations. And this poll will basically say, what standard do you normally use in reporting measurements for residential valuations? And we have three answers: IPMS 1, IPMS 3A, and we have both. Now, I want you to think about it and select one. It's basically if you're doing a valuation for mortgage purposes on a standard house, right? So select. I'm going to launch the poll now. I'll leave it for 20 seconds again. All right, I'm going to end the poll now, right? And I'll share the results with you on the screen. So we have 7 persons who indicate they use IPMS 1, 11 persons indicate IPMS 3A, 2 persons indicate both. Now, in the standard residential mortgage report that the ISCT has, the measurement standard is IPMS 3A. So just to put that out there, but as David would have said in the meeting, there are some proposals, and we're looking at to come together separately to look at these as the valuation fraternity. So now I would stop sharing results and I would leave the next 5 to 10 minutes open for questions.
Just to make it a bit easier, I'm going to allow persons to be able to unmute their mics at this time, hoping it's not a rush. Okay.
Sunil has a question.
Okay, you can unmute your mic now.
Hi, everyone. So very nice presentation, David. I just have a question with regard to office buildings. And I think this is something that we grapple with quite often in terms of what we exclude. It's quite clear that when you have multi-tenanted buildings, that common areas, no matter what those common areas are excluded, right? So corridors, lobbies, restrooms, elevator shafts, all of those things are for everybody's communal use, and that's what the CAM charges covers.
Right.
But what about where you have a tenant who's either occupying the entire building or occupying an entire floor, or let's say a building that has been designed for single tenancy? What would you exclude then? Because that tenant is paying for the exclusive use of that space. They're not sharing it with anyone.
Well, I mean, the facilities that the tenant is paying for can no longer be described as common facilities. So they would have to be included.
So would you still exclude restrooms, for example?
Right. Well, then that is a standard facility. There's a difference. Standard facilities would be excluded. So yes, you would exclude the restroom.
Yeah.
So okay. So we would exclude restrooms. We would exclude things like electrical rooms, HVAC rooms, and stuff like that.
Once it's standard and it doesn't change over time or cannot change over time, you exclude.
What if the tenant puts in their restroom? So like let's say the tenant rents a vacant space and they put in a restroom.
They put in their own restroom. I've never come across that before. Have you?
Yeah.
And they did their own plumbing too?
Yeah, like let's say there was a case in a mall where these tenants had they rented a space on FRI, so it was just a big shelf, and there were restrooms for the building on the outside, and they didn't want to go outside and use these restrooms, so they put in their own restrooms in their space. What do you think about that? I mean, sure, they would be paying rent for that space, but in terms of reporting, do we report that as the IPMS 3 area, the office area?
If they have to vacate the premises, they are removing their restroom?
Yes. Well, I would assume so. Because the normal FRI lease would require that the tenant leaves the property in the same condition and configuration that they got it in.
Yeah.
Right. So this is something I really don't know myself. So I don't know if we've ever thought about those peculiarities.
I mean, even if they remove their fixtures and so the plumbing will still be there.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking another tenant coming in will have the benefit of that. If they would even want to install their own restroom, because you said that there are restrooms available on the outside.
Yes.
I think it comes down to the analysis of the rental. Does it include a provision for that or not? Because you can state it as a standard facility if it's there when you're inspecting the property, but then it comes down to your analysis of the rental itself, as it would contribute to the capital value.
Okay.
David, if I might say something here, Andrew, we see a hand, so just hold on a bit. With the standard facilities, as they would mention in the IPMS, they usually put next to standard facilities, the definition says these facilities do not change over time.
Right,
So I like to think, after dissecting this conversation here, that washroom that a tenant might put up may not be one of those standard facilities. It comes down to the interpretation and the value. If you have an office space 20 by 20 and a tenant decides to rent it as 400 square feet, and the tenant makes a washroom 20 by 10, which makes the effective office space 200 square feet. If the tenant leaves there and a new tenant come back in, a new tenant would be able to tell the landlord, no, this is 200 square feet and pay a reduced rent. So it have another aspect of thinking about it. So a standard facility may be basically how the building is built. My experience with office buildings also show that when people have purpose-built office buildings, that especially if it's a few floors, you could bet your last dollar that all the washrooms going to be directly one above the other, so all the plumbing will come down one side of the building. So they built it to accommodate the washrooms in a particular aspect of the building. That's just my 2 cents towards that. Let me just have Andrew. Andrew,
okay,
you could go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, just to hear me.
Hi, Andrew. Yes.
All right. Well, the conversation has gone into understanding of the nuanced differences between landlord and tenant relationship and the measurement standard. And so that is where I think your answer will come, Sunil. And I think you also answered your question, by the way, because is understanding where there's a difference there. And in David's presentation, he made reference to certain things or certain aspects of the standard where might not necessarily be relevant to us. And that is key, because we understand the market that we operate in, and we understand typical landlord-tenant relationship, typical landlord-tenant leases. And the development of that across time and in our market will sort of dictate or even supersede what IPMS may say or indicate. And so, for example, if you have a building that is rented to a singular tenant, then what does the lease indicate? Does the lease indicate that the landlord is responsible for maintenance and management of all of the service and HVAC facilities in the building? So, for example, does the landlord hold the keys to the AC rooms and electrical rooms and the telephone rooms, and they maintain and manage all that? And how do you treat that in terms of reconciling it with IPMS? So I think that's where your answer may be, Sunil, and that understanding of where landlord and tenant relationships is kind of dictating what even the area of the building is. What is the area that's being leased to the tenant and what the tenant is responsible for, and then how we will correlate that with what the IPMS measurement is.
Yeah, very good point, Andrew. Thanks.
I agree.
Right, David, we have a question from Matthew Alexander in chat. What standard does industry, agencies / banks, etc. normally require? Does it vary, or does it depend on the report provided by the valuation officer?
What standard do is it? What are you asking? Like, what standard clients would expect, like banks, or that's what you're asking?
Yeah, banks. Yeah, what they normally require. Sorry, I'm not sure if you want to expect and require as the same, but just want to clarify that. What does it normally require? What do they normally require?
Well, we would always pay adherence to our global standards, and the global standards say that we have to pay attention to IPMS. So, we're just more or less following the regulations. I don't think the bank specifically would ask for it to be done, for the measurement of the building to be done in a standard other than what we are required to do. If that is the case, you would have to state, why the prescribed standard was not adopted in that particular instance. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I believe that answered the question. I'm waiting on Matthew if Matthew wants to respond. All right, any more questions? Again, based on practice, if you deviate from the standard, you say why. But basically, for office building, the prescribed measurements you want to use is IPMS 3 office. So you're reporting throughout the valuation report IPMS 3 office. I think where the confusion may come about is when we may have adopted another standard before. So we are accustomed to doing revaluations. That's the term we use when we did a valuation a few years back, and now we're doing an evaluation on the same property now, and nothing has changed. The RICS recommends that if a case like that does happen, they allow dual reporting. So it does not hurt to indicate that this time you use IPMS 3, and what is the definition of IPMS 3? And you could also say the last time the applicable code was the Code of Measure and Practice, which was the net internal area. And this is the net internal area. So that's just to avoid confusion in terms of being an RICS member and delivering high standards throughout reporting. Also, I'm not sure if David might have any input on this, but I don't think it hurts to also clarify what is the IPMS 1, the external area of building, because the general notion in our jurisdiction, Trinidad and Tobago, is you sell in a building, everyone basically states the area, and the area is basically the external area. All right, so seldom we see people actually going into the market and making specifics in terms of this is the internal area of my building. So I don't see how it hurts to report on the IPMS 1 as well, but make it clear that you're using IPMS 3A in your report.
As for residential buildings you're talking about?
For office buildings.
For office?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, normally we would use both IPMS 1, the area under IPMS 1, as well as the area under IPMS 3A. For analysis of rentals, the IPMS 3 area will apply. Yeah.
Okay, Matthew, I think we'll take this as the last question if you want to. Would you be able to use your mic and explain what is it you're asking, really? Yes. See, Matthew has asked at different levels requested. Different, I assume that to be the different standards, i.e. IPMS 1, IPMS 3, if the different levels are requested by the banks or industry. I'm not sure if Matthew is getting some trouble with his mic. You see any question, David, in chat?
Let's see, where's chat? I think I have to stop sharing this and that thing.
Yeah, stop sharing and checking.
Oh, right, okay. Right. Different levels. I really don't understand what you mean by different levels. The building levels?
I'm thinking it might actually tie in. Okay, having audio issue. Okay. I'm thinking this might have actually tied into what I was speaking about before, using the different standards, the different IPMS 1, 2, 3, etc. And I think that, well, the standard, the property measurement standard book, second edition, makes it clear on what level or standard, I use it interchangeably, to use for what particular purpose. Right, so I think we should refer to that.
The prescribed purpose for each of the standards.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, talking about valuation, so those standards that I identified earlier would be the relevant ones. Well, I just want to say, something, colleagues, we should practice just taking a lot of measurements. That way, we could convert the measurements to meet any requirement under any of the various standards. So we could convert IPMS 3A to office back to NIA if we need to, or even within IPMS 1, 2, 3A, whatever it is, you take measurements. That would be my advice.
We are seeing some people in the chat saying they agree. Yes, and I totally agree with that. Take as much measurements as you could. Right. Well, David, that brings us to we plan 5 to 6. We took 10 minutes extra. We had some good questions. It was a very good presentation. So if you have any closing remarks before we end, David.
I think the standards are better suited to what we experience here in Trinidad, because, for instance, real estate agents, if we have any real estate agents in the room, how do they determine the area of the space that they want to that they're going to advertise for rent? They're not going to take out any internal walls, and they're going to take a measurement length and breadth. So, it kind of adds a little more validity to, the comms that we might get from them, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and analysis is key. If the measurements standards are different, the analysis will be thrown off.
Yeah.
So colleagues, be very vigilant in how you analyze. If you analyze one thing using the code of measuring practice, you cannot apply it to something using IPMS. You must have some kind of conclusion. But that this brings us to the end of our webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for coming on. We will have the slides shared with those in attendance, and also look out on our website. We usually have the recording of the meeting available there. So please look out. You'll also have your certificate of award of CPD hours, or hour, I should say, for attendance this event, and it will come directly from the Institute's office. So with that, I bid you farewell and a good night. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.